Welcome into the Alabama Football Report. I am your host, RC Maxfield. It is week 7 for your Alabama Crimson Tide as they will head down to Stark Vegas, a.k.a. Starksville, Mississippi, where they will face off against the Mississippi State Bulldogs and the Fighting Mike Leaches of the world, a team that actually beat Texas A&M down in College Station. Alabama cannot say the same after they suffered their first loss of the season last week in College Station. But first, let's look at the matchup between the two schools in the Southeastern Conference. You have the Alabama Crimson Tide as 17-point favorites in this one with a total over-under of 57.5 down in Starksville. Now, a little interesting by this. One thing I did want to point out, it's kind of weird to see a number 5 next to Alabama, right? Like, that's weird. We can all agree to that. Feels weird, but I get it. They lost last week to Texas A&M. They're going to try and get back on the right track. And here are the 5 things that I am watching for in week 7 against the Mississippi State Bulldogs. Let's start with the first one, better on third down. Listen, you win and lose football games when you are good on third downs. That's just simple and plain. Whether it's on the defensive side of the football or the offensive side of the football, that is where you get your bread and butter from. And now looking at the Alabama offense so far this season through 6 weeks and what they've done really well in terms of yards per game and points, obviously really high up there in the country, passing the ball well. And really the interesting part is you'd think it'd be higher on the rushing total, but now Brian Robinson Jr. is a little bit healthy, and he will hop back into this mix, and maybe that allows you to be better on third down, right? You think about it, on third down, great teams have multiple options in terms of the run game, maybe RPOs, as well as strictly pass. And also at the same time, you want to have guys that are a little bit shorter in the sense that you want to have that down and distance shorter, right? You want to have third down opportunities that are, 3rd and 3, 3rd and 4, instead of those 3rd and 8 and 3rd and 9s that you had down in College Station. Overall, what you did in week number 6 against the Texas A&M Aggies, going 9 for 19 on third down, it's just not going to cut it, right? I mean, Nick Saban, Nick Saban at halftime speech with CBS, he was not happy, right? You think about exactly what he said, and third down was the main talking point for him, where he said they have to be better on third down. They just weren't in the first half, and really that continued into the second half as well, where they really, really struggled in the second half in terms of just trying to get that down and distance that they needed on third down, where it seemed like every time it was a third down, it was 3rd and 8, maybe 3rd and 9 even, and they just continued to struggle over and over again on third down. But hey, I know you do. Answer this question for me. If you love the Alabama Crimson Tide, just type RT. You might get hit with a YouTube ad break right here, but just scroll on down the comments, type your RT, let us know that you love the Alabama Crimson Tide, and we all know you do. You're watching this show right now trying to keep up with the latest and greatest information when it comes to the Alabama Crimson Tide. Just let us know. Again, you might get hit with an ad break. Just scroll on down and type that RT to show that you love the Alabama Crimson Tide. BetUS is today's video sponsor. Head over to chatsports.com/TideBet and use the promo code TIDE125 to get the best deposit bonus on the internet today. You're probably thinking, RC, how do I know it's the best? Well, because nobody else is giving you 100% of your deposit bonus and then some on top of it, but BetUS is 125% deposit bonus. All you have to do is go to chatsports.com/TideBet, use the promo code Tide125, and you too can get on this Alabama betting action that we have right here, where you take the money line. At least if you did in week 6, you probably lost, because that's the only loss they have on the money line. They're average against the spread, and when it comes to over-unders as well, they've hit the over 4 times out of 6. Overall, Alabama feels pretty safe to bet on the money line. You can bet over at our sportsbook partner, BetUS. Head over to chatsports.com/TideBet and use the promo code TIDE125 so you too can get the best deposit bonus on the internet today. The second thing I am watching for in week 7 is fix the penalty issue, right? Like, this is one of those things where Alabama just struggles when it comes to penalties. And it's infuriating when you think about it, because they're supposed to have a dominant offensive line, and this is on offense, defense, and everything like that. But overall, you have Nick Saban, who preaches discipline, right? That is one of his biggest just preaching points for his football teams. And this football team just hasn't done very well in the penalty department. Looking at the last 5 weeks for Alabama, they had 9 penalties for 95 yards in week 2. In week 3 against the number 11 Florida Gators at the time, 11 for 75. And then Southern Miss, 7 for 60. Week 5, number 12 Ole Miss, you went 5 for 52, so you got a little bit better. And then last week, the wheels fell off, and you go for 8 penalties for 82 yards. Overall, 8 penalties for 82 yards, it's just not good. You're setting yourself up for failure there when it comes down to it. You're putting yourself behind the chains and really just hurting your chances of really making an impact on either side of the ball, right? You think about it on the offensive side, there was that roughing the passer on Quesada in the Texas A&M game. But overall, I'm looking at the offensive line that's been struggling. And really what it comes down to for me is they have to get better at just these full starts and everything, right? These false starts are really impacting them in the sense that there's a couple people on the offensive line that you trust, one in particular who we'll get to in a moment. But when you look at what Texas A&M has done in terms of, well, what Alabama did against Texas A&M, 8 penalties for 82 yards, that's just not a Nick Saban football team when it's all said and done, right? That's not something that is going to sit well with Nick Saban. And overall, it's just one of those deals, too, where what are you going to do here in terms of how are you going to get better on this? Is it going to be something that's implemented in practice? Are you trying to get better in terms of just the game? What's going on here? I think overall, when it comes down to it, 8 penalties for 82 yards is obviously going to be addressed, but it's just not good when it comes down to it because, well, Evan Neal and guys like him have been stepping up and have been those guys that have been really, really good on the offensive line for the Alabama Crimson Tide. And Matt, go ahead and push that across real quick for me. Evan Neal for it. Evan Neal has been one of those guys where I think he's really, really good, right? And we see it's 82.1 overall PFF grade, not a GERD or whatever I put right there. Appreciate Matt fixing that for me right there. But overall, I think Evan Neal has been great, and he's been really the only guy that stood out on the offensive line. I think that's got to change, right? When you look at what Evan Neal has done, he's really the only guy that, I don't know, bears any trusting when it comes down to it for this offensive line. I think that there's guys and talent there. We're talking about Alabama, right? But Evan Neal is going to be a top 5 pick. He's going to be electric in terms of what he does in his career. But let me know right now in terms of how much faith do you have in the Alabama offensive line? Scale it 1 to 10 for me. Again, I'm probably sitting at a 6 or 7. I really do have a lot of faith in some of these guys' talents. They just haven't proven it to me yet. I need to see them prove it, and I need them to prove it fast because it's one of those deals right now for Alabama. Well, they just got to get going and fast. And speaking of fast, they have to have a fast start down in Stark Vegas. Stark Vegas is one of the toughest places to play in the sense that, yeah, your baseball team's good, and Mike Leach is going to say some weird things and everything like that, but they're going to want to come out and just show that they're electric and they know how to party down there. And, well, if College Station is any indication, well, Alabama didn't handle that well. But it all starts with Bryce Young, right? Bryce Young has been absolutely dominant this year so far, almost a 70% completion percentage, getting close to 1,800 yards, 20 TDs, and 3 interceptions. I think he's been really, really good, right? But here's the thing. You cannot mess around and give Mississippi State any hope. You gave hope last week to the Aggies down in College Station, and you just can't do that against Mississippi State. I think Alabama will come out and have a chip on their shoulder, but overall, you just can't give the Bulldogs any hope down there in Starksville, right? And if you do, it's going to be another long day. I don't expect it to be, but it could if you do allow them to stay in the game early. Now, how many TDs will Bryce Young throw versus Mississippi State? I think it's an interesting question because Mississippi State just doesn't have a good secondary. To be honest with you, let's be honest, it's Mike Leach, who is the coach there, not his forte when it comes to the defensive side of the football. Let me know how many TDs will Bryce Young throw versus Mississippi State. Fourth thing I am watching, can the secondary respond? You let a backup quarterback in Calzada for the Aggies really have a field day for yourself, right? And I'm looking at 2 guys in particular in this secondary, and the first one is Josh Jobe. It's got to get better. Here's his season numbers. He has 12 tackles and 2 pass breakups as well. I think when it comes down to it, he's the guy that really is surprising me the most with his inconsistency in the secondary. I thought he'd be a lot better as an experienced player. Now, Jalen Armour Davis, on the other hand, has produced at a pretty high level for the Alabama Crimson Tide, as 11 tackles, 3 pass breakups, and then 1 interception as well. I really like what I see from him, but the fact of the matter is these guys both are vastly inconsistent. They need to be better, and I think Alabama and just the talent that they have is obviously there, but you can't make Will Rogers look good, right? You just can't. Will Rogers is not the guy you want looking good. I can understand Calzada to a degree. Texas A&M was hyped for this game. They're probably better than they stood out to be in terms of being unranked, but you cannot let Will Rogers look good. You just can't do this, right? But you know what you can do? Hit that big red button for me and subscribe to the best Alabama football channel on YouTube right now. We are trying to get to 7,500 subs. We're well on our way right now, but we need your help. Tell all your Crimson Tide family and friends about the best YouTube channel for your Alabama Crimson Tide. And the best part about it, it's absolutely free. Who else is doing that on the internet? Nobody. But right here on Chat Sports in the Alabama Football Report, be sure to hit that big red button and turn it gray. My last 5 things to watch for this game, bounce back. It's that simple, honestly, right? You're Alabama. That's who you are. This defense has to respond, and it has to respond against Mike Leach's offense, where he's known to have a great offense, but this defense, it hasn't lived up to the par in terms of what Alabama has stood for years, right? You think about it. Georgia is allowing 5.5 points per game. Alabama's at 22. That's the standard you're on if you're the Crimson Tide, right? Like, you are on the standard of Georgia. You are trying to get to that national championship game and play the Bulldogs. That's what you want, right? And if you don't have to face the Bulldogs and you're in the national championship game, take it for granted there. I fully expect Alabama to bounce back, and I expect Alabama to dominate. Simple and plain. That's what I expect them to do. I expect them to go down to Starksville and handle business and leave there with a W, heading back to Tuscaloosa 6-1. It's all about business now. There's no room for error for this Alabama football team. They have to go in there and handle business, and I fully expect them to do so against the Bulldogs. But go ahead and predict the score for me. Alabama Crimson Tide head down to Starksville to face off against the Bulldogs of Mississippi State. I'll go ahead and give you my score prediction right now. 38-17, and you know I'm picking Roll Tide in this one as Alabama gets back on track and heads to 6-1 on the season, and I fully expect them to jump up a little bit in the rankings, maybe to number 4 and get in that college football playoff discussion as, again, I have Alabama getting back on track 38-17 over the Bulldogs of Mississippi State.